rules and regulations of the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001, and which you know clearly better than I do. How do you respond to such comments when you look at what they do on social media, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, which are basically American companies?
So I have seen a lot of the videos that you're referring to, and I am very troubled by, and we all should be troubled by, videos where people are calling for violence, where people are suggesting that killing students and preventing them from going to school is somehow a valid approach to resolving underlying social concerns. It isn't, and it never will be. The people in the diaspora, be they in the United States or elsewhere, who have been calling over the past several years for violence, need to stop. There's no question about that. This is what I was saying a minute ago. Violence is not the answer. Violence is never going to be the answer. People need to have a peaceful conversation. Those who are encouraging attacks on schools, the burning of hospitals, the shooting of people who violate these imposed regulations by the non-state armed groups, those calls for violence just need to stop. Coming back to your dialogue question, whether you call it a dialogue, a conversation, a discussion, the point is peace can only be achieved peacefully.
Before this interview comes to an end, we will talk sports. But one of the issues when it comes to the Northwest and Southwest equally, and I've heard this conversation from several people, they say that there is a portion of the Cameroonian diaspora living in the United States of America foiling all of this, and Yaoundé says that from time to time she has written to Washington to have these people liberated, that she qualifies terrorists, creating chaos, and that they even go against the rules and regulations of the U.S. Patriot Act of 2000.
Good evening. This is Comrade Funton Daniel. I thought it was a most appropriate time for me to address the U.S. ambassador to the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon. This is Comrade Funton Daniel here in the great state of Texas, here in the United States. Sorry for the inconvenience, but anyway, this is Comrade Funton Daniel. Today is the 22nd, one day after the United Nations vote in 1961, and I thought it was imperative for me just to talk about these issues because there is ongoing crisis in southern Cameroon, and yet the U.S. ambassador, no doubt about it, I respect the United States. United States is the most amazing nation on the planet. I know there are certain countries in Africa that they are embracing China. I have lived in these great nations for major of my life, but I won't dispute any fact that United States is the best place that you want to be in the rest of the world. But it doesn't mean that the United States does not have its own downs and falls. But however, looking globally on this planet, United States is the best place that you can have your question addressed and answer accurately. Let's take for example in China. I know many investment that China is carrying out in Africa, and so people look upon China as the most amazing nation that they welcome as an alternative to the United States. This is where I disagree with that assessment. United States will agree when they are at fault, and they will disagree when they are right. And that is the only nation that you can recognize that they understand the fundamental value of human dignity. And that is why United States differ from China. I understand some African nations are welcoming China as an alternative to the United States. But however, I disagree, because let's take, for example, in southern Cameroon, which I am going to be talking about, is a clear example. When the people of La République du Cameroon declare war on the people of southern Cameroon, and the military equipment that were supplied to La République du Cameroon to utilize, China facilitate and assist La République du Cameroon to provide military equipment in which they are using in southern Cameroon. But however, this is the painful that all the fellow brothers and sisters are feeling, and yet you welcome China as an alternative to the United States. When I speak about the military weapons that were used, United States will facilitate to help northern Boko Haram in La République du Cameroon. Those military equipment were shipped to southern Cameroon. When I spoke out, the United States respect, and that military equipment was withdrawn. And yet, imagine the same military equipment that China is supplied to La République du Cameroon, the Chinese remain absolutely silent. And so that is the contrast difference between the United States and China, in which African embrace as an alternative. But that is where I disagree. Now, I am going to talk about today the southern Cameroon. It is very unfortunate. It is very unfortunate. Now, I'm going to respond to U.S. ambassador. I call the U.S. ambassador to the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon, and I'm going to talk about why. And I have used that phrase for quite some time. La République ambassador in the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon. So we're going to discuss more about these issues this afternoon here in the great state of Texas, here in the United States. Now, fellow citizens of southern Cameroon, I understand the pain and the humiliation that you guys are going through, especially the sons and daughters of southern Cameroon. Despite the fact that the United Nations vote in 1961, yesterday I had anticipated to broadcast this message, but unfortunately I couldn't, and that is why I scaled back the message to be broadcast today. United Nations Resolution 1514 XV. United Nations Resolution 1514 XV. A call for decolonizations. A call for decolonizations. It means that those territories, how did it come about? Let me recall back again. When the United Nations or the Allied members defeated Germany during the Second World War, during the process defeating Germany, there were certain territories that were under the control of the Germans. United Nations was formed in 1945. The purpose of that formation was to maintain peace and security throughout the world. So southern Cameroon and some other part of African countries under the German were placed under the Allied members. In this case, the southern Cameroon were under the British government, and La République du Cameroon was under the French. So by virtue of the United Nations Resolution 1514, it says all those territories that were under the colonial master be given the rightful independence. Southern Cameroon meet those criteria of the United Nations Resolution 1514 XV. In following through those United Nations Resolution 1514 XV, the United Nations voted here in the United States. It was on the 21st of April at 3 p.m. here in the United States, here in New York. They recognized the United Nations Resolution 1608 XV. By virtue of that resolution, the people of southern Cameroon should have been decolonized. The people of southern Cameroon should have been decolonized. And therefore, the population of Southern Cameroon at that particular time, it was more than Equatorial Guinea. The population of Southern Cameroon was more than the Equatorial Guinea. Why I refer to Equatorial Guinea? Because it's the smallest nation country in Africa, Equatorial Guinea. So therefore, in value to the United Nations, the people of Southern Cameroon should have been decolonized. First, the British government violated the United Nations Resolution 1514 XV by illegally disenfranchise the people of Southern Cameroon their right to self-determination, their right to independence. Many scholars have agreed why the British government disenfranchised the people of Southern Cameroon, despite the fact that Southern Cameroon was the only government in West Africa that has an elected democratic institution and able to transfer power from one elected official to another elected officials. First, the Prime Minister of Ndele was the first Prime Minister elected into a government of Southern Cameroon, the first of its kind in West Africa. John Foncha was elected the subsequent Prime Minister. Power was transferred peacefully to John Foncha. And later, the same election, it was Jua, the third Prime Minister, the first a democratic institution in the entire West Africa combined, including Nigeria. La République du Cameroon, on the other hand, its independence was in 1960. They have never, historically, demonstrated an elected government and transfer power. And yet, they see the people of Southern Cameroon to live on the crumbs of La République bread. And that is the painful suffering of our people that are still going through till now. With respect to international community, they use the word a non-actor government. You know, they phrase the word, they paraphrase the word to fit their wrong narratives. The world international community paraphrase the word to fit their wrong narratives so that they propagate through the world. Become the philosophy because they have the power. They decide what is the culture they want to propagate. And that is the wrong culture. Remember, all of us went to the same institution. We went to the same school. We studied. And we want to propagate what is right. And so the world community paraphrase a absolutely wrong become the culture in which they propagate. If we are honest to ourselves, if the world is honest to themselves, then the Southern Cameroon question should never be a subject of debate. I am going to play some of the video. You will listen. They said, a non-actor fighting for a government. Remember, La République has not demonstrated. If we are a democratic country and we want to promulgate democratic institutions, La République does not fit into any of those categories. La République doesn't, because it has. When was La République government elected? Let's be clear and let's be honest to ourselves. When, since La République got independent in 1961, when 1st of January 1960, when La République du Cameroon gained her independence from the same body, the United Nations. And the following year, 1961, the people of Southern Cameroon, on the 21st of April, 1961, when has La République du Cameroon demonstrated an elected government? Let's be honest to ourselves. If we are to propagate democratic institutions, should La République government be respected? Let's be honest to ourselves, the world community. Remember, All of us went to the same school, we studied, and the purpose of study and education is to make sure that we have the world the better the way we want the world to look like. And that is the purpose which we went to education. We cannot change the narratives to reflect our own personal ego, which is morally wrong. Now, I do not question the US government, but however, I will ask, if something is absolutely wrong, that state government cannot support. Now, let's go back to this question. Listen again.
And one, and which you know clearly better than I do. How do you respond to such comments when you look at what they do on social media?
Coming back to your dialogue question, whether you call it a dialogue, a conversation, a discussion, the point is peace can only be achieved peacefully.
Before this interview comes to an end, we will talk sports. But one of the issues when it comes to the Northwest and Southwest equally.
Now, you listen to the phrase Northwest and Southwest. Northwest and Southwest. That is something that baffles me until this moment, and I'm still questioning myself. How do the people of Southern Cameroon become a province in a foreign country? Because they shape the narratives to reflect their personal agenda so that they share it and they propagate it, and that becomes the narrative of the day. In 1960, January 1st, 1960, the United Nations voted to recognize the Republic of Cameroon. In doing so, the Southern Cameroon was not, let me be clear, Southern Cameroon was not part of La République du Cameroun. In 1961, 1st of April 1961, here in the United States, the vote in the United States at New York, 1st of April 1961, La République du Cameroun voted with all the rest of the French colony, with support of France, voted not to recognize the statehood of Southern Cameroon. And today, the people of Southern Cameroon become a province in a foreign country. Remember, Southern Cameroon has a prime minister and a head of government, a government that was actually voted and elected by the people. On the other hand, in the neighboring country, La République du Cameroun, they have never held a clear democratic election that seek the transfer of power. As I'm speaking, they are looking to transfer from Boeg to his son, someone that has been there for more than 40 years. Our people are not stupid. Let's go back to that discussion again. Pay close attention.
I've heard this conversation from several people. They say that there is a portion of the Cameroonian diaspora living in the United States of America foiling all of this, and Yaoundé says that from time.
Of course, they call the diaspora. Of course, the people of the diaspora are not stupid. They're not stupid. Does that government in Yaoundé represent the people of Southern Cameroon? Of course not. Does it meet their aspiration? Even La République itself? No. Because it's a government that never elected. It's someone that is in power and glue onto that power as though it's his personal property. The people of Southern Cameroon could not cohabit with that system. And the option, the people of Southern Cameroon choose the nuclear option. And the nuclear option is to leave that rubbish, because They never saw our response based on the fundamental right that we should have been together in the first place. Now, let's go back to the message again.
Time to time, she has written to Washington to have these people liberated, that she qualifies terrorists, creating chaos, and that they even go against the rules and regulations of the U.S. Patriot Act of 2000.
Of course, whoever is the journalist, he talked about the U.S. law. Does La Republic respect their own law? That does not mean that people should not respect the United States law. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The United States has the best judiciary system, if you have ever been in one. But the United States does not tolerate an injustice. An injustice. Imagine the same citizens of Southern Cameroon are treated differently in La Republic du Cameroon. In La Republic, citizens are being released from prison. They have one of the most worst crimes. But yet, our citizens are given the longest sentences, are shot like animals. Now, the question is, how did this crisis arose? That's the big question. How did this crisis arose? Now, it was simply a vibrant citizens of Southern Cameroon that have seen their judiciary system, their common law system, completely eradicated by La Republique du Cameroon. They staged a peaceful demonstration. Instead of La Republique du Cameroon to respond to those peaceful demonstrations, they send their military to destroy, they send their military to show us how powerful they are. So, in order to resolve a problem or to look at the circumstances, let's look at the situation. Now, let me phrase back, let me go to healthcare profession. When there is an issue, let's say if a patient comes to the hospital, the key fundamental question they ask that particular patient, what brought you to the hospital today? So the message is clear. What brought you to the hospital? So when the patient says, I have a stomach bite or I have a chest pain, that becomes the chief complaint. What do I mean by that? The chief complaint is exactly what brought the patient to the hospital. And that becomes a dynamic focus from the all department of the hospital. If this patient came here today because of chest pain, then they're probably going to look the position of a cardiology. They're going to look all the various steps to focus on that particular problems. And that becomes an imperative narrative on how to treat how to cure that particular patient's symptoms, which is the chief complaint. So now, when the people of Southern Cameroon demonstrate, they have a grievances. That grievances become the chief complaint. So I will divert my question to the U.S. ambassador. To resolve the crisis, it requires to focus on the chief complaint. And the chief complaint goes back to 1961, during the United Nations Resolution 1608 XV, which should have been, why do the people of Southern Cameroon cannot remain independent? There are multitude of nations in Europe. They are not up to 1 million, and yet they have their independence. The people of Southern Cameroon is more than 8 million. Why can't they have their independence? Why should they live under the umbrella of a foreign country, La Republique du Cameroon? Just hold on. No, I'm busy. Sorry for the inconvenience. So, one would want to ask, why did they not respect the United Nations Resolution 1514 and 1608 XV? So that is the problems. We go back to the chief complaint. Of course, the individuals asking the people of Southern Cameroon. The people of Southern Cameroon were sitting, or what they call the diaspora, they were sitting at their home, watching the impunity. Now let's listen to, before we reach to this, but listen to this excerpt from this Human Rights Watch representative. Listen.
There is a written statement I'll be reading from, so if folks want to have that, you can have access to that later. It's also here. There is no longer any controversy. Leading British historical and legal agencies, and none other than French President Emmanuel Macron, have equally and recently asserted colonialism was and is a crime against humanity. As such, United Nations protocols empower all peoples and parties to act with the, quote, responsibility to prevent genocide and the, quote, responsibility to protect. It is not so useful in the case of the Cameroons or Ambazonia to spend time debating who is most at fault. Is it the government in Yaoundé or the man called Biya, who has been president since I was 19 years old, the longest ruling leader in the world? Is it the original French colonists who, along with their British counterparts, set up this competitive, divided we fall scramble way back when? Is it the UN in failing to oversee the promises made decades ago? Perhaps it's the children of Ambazonia who, frustrated at increasing police and military violence and little to show for decades of completely nonviolent and unarmed actions against their colonial predicament, pick up some stones to defend themselves just over the past year. There is enough guilt to go around, and we say again, it is not so useful to spend time debating who is most at fault. The UN mandated responsibility to protect and the responsibility to prevent genocide equally, especially,
which you know clearly better than I do. How do you respond to such comments when you look at what they do on social media, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, which are basically American companies?
So I have seen a lot of the videos that you're referring to, and I am very troubled by, and we all should be troubled by, videos where people are calling for violence, where people are suggesting that killing students and preventing them from going to school is somehow a valid approach to resolving underlying.
Remember, our people did not just step out and started fighting. It was a massive repressive system inflicted upon our family. Homes burned. Children burned into ashes. Let me see if I can get hold of that picture. Just hold on. Stay tuned. Just hold on. Let me see if I can get that child that was burnt by the military of La République du Cameroon that set homes in fire. And we couldn't sit and watch our brothers and sisters burnt like animals. Hold on. Let me see if I can get hold of that picture. Otherwise, I will bring it in the next subsequent broadcast.
social concerns. It isn't, and it never will be. The people in the diaspora, be they in the United States or elsewhere.
Of course, you saw the images that I showed to you. That was a child that was burnt in their home in southern Cameroon by the military of this land Republic to Cameroon. And you expect our citizens who were from southern Cameroon sit and fold their arms and watch. Imagine that you were in Florida, or you were in Texas, or you were in Arizona, or you were in Washington, D.C., and you watch the police officer or military of a foreign nation, probably Canada military, probably Canada, or probably the Mexican military, stage into and burn the children in Texas. Could you imagine what would have been happening in Mexico? Of course, they would tear Mexico into dust. And then, could you imagine we, the sons and daughters, living in the United States and watching our citizens burnt, homes destroyed? And we just sit and watch and say, motion de soutien, motion de support to a government that should never have been existed in the first place. Mr. Ambassador, I respect all your point, but however, I disagree with you. Let me bring a U.S. ambassador to whom you succeeded, and you listen to his comment. I'm sure he must have built a foundation. Let me bring him, and let me see. I could read his message. Stay tuned.
Who have been calling over the past several years for violence need to stop. There's no question about that. This is what I was saying a minute ago. Violence is not the answer. Violence is never going to be the answer. People need to have a peaceful conversation. Those who are encouraging attacks on schools, the burning of hospitals, the shooting of people who violate these imposed regulations by the non-state armed group, those calls for violence just need to stop. Coming back to your dialogue question, whether you call it dialogue, a conversation, a discussion, the point is peace can only be achieved peacefully.
Before this interview comes to an end, we will talk sports. But one of the issues when it comes to the Northwest and Southwest, this conversation several. They say that rules and regulations of the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001, and which you know clearly better than I do. How do you respond to such comments when you look at what they do on social media, for example, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, which are basically American companies?
So I have seen a lot of the videos that you're referring to, and I am very troubled by, and we all should be troubled by, videos where people are calling for violence, where people are suggesting that killing students and preventing them from going to school is somehow a valid approach to resolving underlying social concerns. It isn't, and it never will be. The people in the diaspora, be they in the United States or elsewhere, who have been calling over the past several years for violence.
This is the former predecessor. This is the former predecessor in which he took over. He says the government, I'm reading from his statement, the former U.S. ambassador that was in place during this crisis when it erupted. This is what the ambassador wrote. The government has committed summary executions. They are guilty of detaining people and not allowing them access to lawyers, to their families, even to visit from the Red Cross. They have been guilty of burning villages, looting, and of general harassment of the population. That is written by the former predecessor of U.S. ambassador. So the people of Southern Cameroon did not get out of the blue and start questioning the validity of La Republic du Cameroon. It was a systematic injustice inflicted upon our family back home by a government that should never have been in place in this current system. The people of Southern Cameroon should have had their government. And that is why when you look underneath the U.S. ambassador, the picture with the white background, that was the Queen of England. That was the late Queen of England. Personally, in Southern Cameroon territory, visiting the Southern Cameroon territory. And if I'm not mistakenly, that was in Tico. If I'm not mistakenly, that was in Tico when she landed. She physically visited the Southern Cameroon. Then my obvious question, how did we arose that we become a province in a foreign country, La Republic du Cameroon? I want to reflect again. The population of Southern Cameroon is more than the population of Equatorial Guinea. Even at this moment, the population of Southern Cameroon is more than 3 or 5 times more than the population of Equatorial Guinea. If we are honest to ourselves, that let's do justice, recognize the state of Southern Cameroon. Remember, when the United States, several 200 years ago, declared its independence, they required a one nation to recognize the sovereign state of the United States. It was Africa. Today, United States is protecting Europe. Not only just the Britain alone, but the entire continent of Europe. But we, the people of Southern Cameroon, are asking simple help. Recognize the state of Southern Cameroon. That's all the people need. They can move forward. They don't need military aid. They don't need financial assistance. The people are viable. They just need simple recognition. As the king of Morocco did in some 200 years ago, recognize the independence of the United States. As the first African country to recognize after the United States declared its independence in some 200 years ago, as its sovereign state, they no longer take order, instruction from Britain. No taxation without a representative. That was the great philosophy of the leaders of this great nation. It's time the United States recognize the people of Southern Cameroon. That is all the people of Southern Cameroon need. They don't need nothing. They don't need financial support. They don't need anything. They just need simply recognize them so that they can move on with their life, peace and tranquility. That is all they need. can the United States return that favor? It is very painful for upon how many millions of Africa they're watching. They feel very embarrassed. When it comes to Africa, the problem becomes irregarded. So that's what they need, help. And they're going to move forward with their life in harmony and in peace. They are not breaking away. They simply recognize their statehood that was never given to them. And that is all they need. Why is it that when it comes to Africa, we tend to neglect? We frame, we paraphrase, we give our narratives, and people tend to assume that is the truth. That is not. That is not. So remember, U.S. ambassador studied here in the United States, and so too do we. So let's be coherent in our facts. The people of Southern Cameroon, I am not making stories. I have the United Nations vote. Let me go back and look at the United Nations vote. Let's be honest to ourselves. I mean, it's imperative that we recognize the truth and stand for the truth. United States cannot continue supporting France for illegal occupation of Southern Cameroon because the people of Southern Cameroon don't have a privilege. They don't have nowhere to go. Now, United States should stand for truth and stand for the truth. That's all United States needs. United States cannot be supporting France blindly because they occupy territory in Africa. France's position in Africa is becoming an obsolete, and I think the United States need to recognize this as from now, that the interest of France in Africa has become an obsolete, and we no longer tolerate. Let me look at the United Nations vote. The United Nations General Assembly, 1608 XV, 21st of April 1961. The United Nations General Assembly, plenary session of 994, meeting on Friday, 21st of April 1961 at 3 p.m. in New York. And following this session, there were 3 members in place. The Southern Cameroon Independence Vote. That was the title. The Southern Cameroon Independent Vote. Why is it so difficult for the world, even the United States government, to stand for an obligation, doing good for the greatest number? Doing good for the greatest number. That is all the people of Southern Cameroon need. Recognize their status, and simply that is it. And the people will face for themselves than to living under the umbrella of a foreign nation, La Republic du Cameroon, because we want to please France. That is immoral. That is immoral. If we are honest about ourselves, that we want to make the world a peaceful place, then we need to be honest to ourselves, even to those whom we entrust ourselves to them. And in this case, France. The pain of the people of Africa can never be overemphasized about the humiliation that they go through when it comes to the policy and decision when they affect Africa. 64 nations vote here in the United States to recognize the state. 23 voted. The population that actually vote for the independence of Southern Cameroon or the members' nations were more than they actually voted for La Republic du Cameroon. The number of people, let me repeat, the number of nations voted for the independence of Southern Cameroon on this 999 plenary session or 994 were more than the actual number voted for La Republic du Cameroon. And yet, the people of Southern Cameroon remain an umbrella to a foreign nation, La Republic du Cameroon. And yet, people give wrong narratives. Now let's listen to one of the U.S. Congress members Let me see if I can pull out her videos. Just pay attention. Before we go to that, listen to this US Senate representative or the British representative.
See their expectations of a prosperous and safe life trampled underfoot. My lords, this crisis has its origins in a plebiscite of 1961, which I, in my own childhood, in the region at the time, recall as being of concern then, certainly to the region, to my father, who was a cabinet minister in a neighbouring country, but also and significantly to members of this House and the other place, who saw in a flawed plebiscite that posed simply a binary question to the English-speaking regions of the Cameroon: join Nigeria or join Francophone Cameroon. That was the choice that was given them. They were not given the choice to form their own independent state. My lords, we live with the legacy of that plebiscite in the plight of the peoples of the Cameroon, and the English-speaking peoples of the Cameroon in particular, to this day. And the horrific figures, my lords, speak for themselves. 100,000 peoples displaced. 3.3 million peoples in need of humanitarian assistance. More than 450 innocent civilians killed in the course of the conflict in the Anglophone regions, countless separatist fighters and government soldiers.
Coming back to your dialogue question, whether you call it dialogue, a conversation, a discussion, the point is peace can only be achieved peacefully.
Before this interview comes to an end, we will talk sports. But, one of the issues when it comes to the Northwest and Southwest equally, and I've heard this conversation from several people, they say
de la zone anglophone, mais elle reste dans l'intégrité territoriale du Cameroun. Ça
That was the colonial master.
Please, if you, we understand.
The people of Southern Cameroon are going through systematic crisis from 3 colonial countries. First with Germany, second with Britain, and now La République du Cameroun. What a double jeopardy. First, initially, the people of Southern Cameroon came into this wedding. I call wedding that the marriage never took place. I call it a wedding or a marriage that never took place. Now, just hold on. Stay tuned. Just hold on.
There's no question about that. This is what I was saying a minute ago. Violence is not the answer.
Listen. I call it wedding that never took place. The relationship, the cohabit relationship between the people of Southern Cameroon and the neighboring country, La République du Cameroun. Whatever the circumstances that they brought them together was under the federal structure. And that is why the previous speaker that I just shown, that was a British elected officials in the British Parliament, if I'm not mistakenly. He was dressed in the British Parliament. And he answered the question, why was there a binary that the people of South Cameroon should either match with Nigeria or with La République du Cameroon? Whatever the 2 binary questions that were presented, and option 3 was omitted, and what should have been the option 3? Do you opt for an independent country? The people of Southern Cameroon at the time were more than the Equatorial Guinea. And that option should never have been omitted. And that is the bottom line. I spoke a few minutes ago about when a patient comes to the hospital, when the patient has a chest pain, the doctor immediate question said, what brought you to the hospital? The question is an open question, an open-ended question, so that the patient can elicit why the patient brought to the hospital. Something must have been going wrong, and that has prompted the patient to be in that setting, in the hospital. Maybe there was a family member that the patient became unresponsive and therefore could not answer that question, what brought you to the hospital? Obviously, the family member will obviously notice what was going wrong and why she thinks that, he or she thinks that, that patient needs to be brought to the hospital. And that becomes the fundamental question. What brought you to the hospital? This provides a guideline for the hospital personnel, the doctors, the nurses. They will be the primary focus to treat that patient so that the patient can return to his normal activities. So the people of Southern Cameroon were totally neglected. They did not just out of the blue and start fighting. It was something that went wrong, and that is the chief complaint, that had been totally neglected. But paraphrase and say, oh, the people are just non-state actors. That is the word they use to phrase and show the world. And because they undermine the key fundamental question, because it's not for the, because they knew they are absolutely wrong. I will urge the U.S. ambassador, I will urge the U.S. Secretary of State for Africa, I will urge the U.S. State Secretary to go back to the United Nations Resolution 1608. Let's begin to find out what relationship existed, if any, with the Republic of Cameroon, the people of Southern Cameroon. It's time. If we are fighting in the Ukraine, so too we should recognize that smaller nations have problems that they need an urgent attention. We should not whitewash, cement the problem as though they never exist. We paraphrase our own statement and prescribe it a non-state actor. That became the fundamental chief complaint that we put to the world to recognize. It is immoral that we understood the truth and we choose not to, and we biasly care less about them, and yet our people are suffering, and we expect all of us to be condoling and respect the Republic of Cameroon. I'm sure you will feel the same if such a Mexico government military were here in the great state of Texas bombarding, killing children in the state of Texas, and you expect the state of Texas and just sit and watch. I'm sure you will feel the pain that I am feeling as well, and the rest of the citizens of Southern Cameroon that are going through similar pain. Let's backdate and see where we went wrong, and let's trace our roots and see where we went wrong. Then we can finalize the solutions, and that is the key fundamentals of the question: who is La République in Southern Cameroon? This is how Paul Biya has been able to get along with the crime he committed. Now let's look at who the actors are. Just watch. This is how Paul Biya is able to get by, handing over a piece of iron to the various members of leaders of the free world. And the question of Southern Cameroon has always been neglected. The question of Southern Cameroon has always been neglected because they are passing this iron with filling their pocket. And yet, once they step out of Yaoundé, they become relatively as though they knew nothing, and they're blindfolded and no one is speaking. Of course, they expect all of us, they call the diaspora, to fold our arms and watch and sympathize with the Republic of Cameroon. And that is what the interviewer is asking the US ambassador. And he's not honest like his predecessor. Let me come back to that US ambassador.
Is never going to be the answer. People need to have a peaceful conversation. Those who are encouraging...
Who's supposed to initiate? The Republic of Cameroon has the pen. The Republic of Cameroon has the ink. The Republic of Cameroon has the military. But they choose the military as the options. That is what they choose. They choose the military as their option. When our lawyers, our judges, the most important people of our society simply demonstrate against injustice, the Commonwealth system, they choose the military options. And that is what has brought us to what it is today. But yet, I will urge the US ambassador to ask the very journalists what happened. The diaspora. The diaspora were just sitting in their various homes and quietly, living peacefully, until they start watching images coming from La Republic du Cameroon of our fellow brothers and sisters. And so we cannot sit, fold our arms and watch that going on, the slaughtering. And that is what we did. So I urge the US ambassador, listen to your predecessor, what he left behind, so that you copy exactly what he did. He speak without fear or favor. Your former predecessor, he speak without fear or favor. The United States does not stand and speak in fear or favor. United States is the most powerful nation on the planet, and whoever represents the image of the United States must hold the spirit of the United States dearly and speak clearly without fear or favor. The people of Southern Cameroon did not just come out of the blue. It was a provocation by La Republic du Cameroon, slaughtering our brothers and sisters indiscriminately. You listen to what your predecessor described. We will not tolerate that behavior. The fact that we are black races, but that does not mean that we're going to sit and fold our arm and watch our brothers back home being slaughtered like animals by a government that never represents our people. They describe it, non-actor, to shoot their, to feed their narratives. Does the government of La Republic represent the people of Southern Cameroon? Of course not. You saw the mafia that is just going on with certain individuals that were selected and called senator. The current government, they call as you described, none of them can recall their family name. They're walking like a ghost. They're walking like a ghost. The devil's spirit. And no one can even recall the wife, the children. But they are leader of a government. And yet, can the US ambassador speak like his predecessor without fear or favor? I think it is time that the US stand and speak up. Because we will not fold our arm and watch our people become the slaughtering house. But anyway, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you watching, that our people will continue the spirit that was inflicted upon our people without judication, without disregard. I end with this message. 200 years ago, the king of Morocco returned a favor, recognized the independent state of the United States. We are asking the US government, the most powerful nation on the planet, return the favor. We will not watch. We isolated because we want to please France. Because we want to please France. We cannot please France when moral and immoral wrong. We cannot please France. We need to recognize the truth. We need to stand for the truth. Let's recognize the United Nations 1608 that called for an independence of Southern Cameroon. The people does not need the United States or any government subvention. They just need their sovereign territory to be recognized. They can move on with their life and peaceful and able to elect a person they call a government that represents the aspiration of the people. The people have lived sovereign. So therefore, we do not twist, we do not pieces everything. Let's stand for moral obligation. Do good for the greatest number. This is Comrade Funton Daniel speaking live here from the great state of Texas. I wish you all a happy weekend.
Attacks on schools, the burning of hospitals, the shooting